Hello, how are you? Can you hear me? Hello. Just waiting for a few more people to come. All right. Vanessa, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. So thank you guys for being here. I'm just about to get started. There are some points in here where I'm going to ask some questions. So I hope you'll be able to help me answer them. And there may be a few people that join us, but it's a lot of material. So I want to get started. Thank you again for being here. Um, all right. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about buyers and getting buyer commitment. Oops. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about why working with buyers is cool. We're going to talk about getting ready to meet with buyers, things you should do before you meet with them and do a buyer consultation meeting, things to think about at the consultation. We talk a lot about the needs assessment component and getting them to sign the documents, but I wanted to talk about five elements I think are really important. I'm going to talk a little bit about the legal documents that we ask buyers to sign to engage our services. I'm going to talk a little bit about exclusivity. What does it mean to have an exclusive relationship with a buyer? I'm going to talk about buyer loyalty agreements, which can be a very helpful tool to cement the relationship. I'm going to give you some samples of conversation starters you can use. And I'm also going to give you some negotiation tips. And I'll leave time for questions at the end as well as interspersed. Please feel free to ask me questions anytime. Do you guys have any questions before we start?
No.
Okay, awesome. So why should we consider working with buyers? So it's very important to understand that buyers are clearly needing different support from us than sellers do. Many of the buyers we deal with are not experienced at buying homes, and they really need us to be in their corner and to guide them along the way. If you serve your buyers well, even if you don't stay in touch with them, they will come back. I've had so many cases where, I was sending out postcards and staying in touch, sending texts and stuff, but none of it was getting to my past client. But they still reached out to me when they were ready to sell their home. Um, so, if you've done a good job, they will remember you and they will want to work again with you. And if you can stay in touch with them in an organized fashion, that's even better. The other thing is that even though, even though it's true that we ask our buyers to pay us a commission, it's also true that most sellers in our area will pay some or all of the buyer agent commission, which we ask for in the offer we make. So when your buyer makes an offer, one of the terms is, please pay my agent. And most of the time, sellers are open to it. I wrote an offer this past weekend for a buyer, and the offer was accepted against another offer without a counteroffer, and I was asking for my full fee, 3%. We did not get countered on it. Seller agreed to pay my whole commission. So that was good. More often than not, I do get 3%. And I ask my buyers to pay it for me, and I have a conversation with them, which we're going to talk a little bit about. All right. So before you go to meet with a buyer for a buyer consultation, there's three things that you need to do. So uh, I recommend you have these things sorted out. The first one is establishing your value proposition. Now, we have this as part of the new agent assignment. In the new agent assignment, we basically say, develop a value proposition. Why? Because when you're meeting with someone one-on-one, you want them to understand what you're doing to earn that commission you're charging them. So this is a very important step. If you don't feel confident yet about what you're going to say about why they should hire you, then we need to work on that. Really, really important. I want to talk a little bit more about it in a minute. The second thing I want you to think about before you go to any meetings is, what is your service offering exactly? What are your standards? What are you going to do for buyers? We're going to talk about that in this class. And then develop your buyer consultation. What I mean by that is you should have a structure. You should have a beginning, middle, and end, and you should have an intentionality before you go into the meeting about what it's going to look like, what you're going to learn, and what you're going to share. Some tips just to start. Active listening. When you do a buyer consultation, you do not want to be the one doing all the talking. You want your clients to be knowing that you're hearing them. If you're meeting in person, which is always better, try to look them in the eyes. The other thing about, and really take an effort to not think about what you're going to say next, but to think about what they're saying. The second part of it is to be curious, be interested, ask questions. For example, I want you to, if somebody says they need a large yard, you should not just write down on a piece of paper, large yard, or in your notepad or whatever. You should ask them, really, that's great. Tell me more. What would you use a large yard for? The more you ask backup questions and show a curiosity about the whys behind the intent, the more you're going to get deeper and deeper into an understanding of what their needs are. Avoid presumptions. Just because people look a certain way or talk a certain way is no reason for you to make assumptions about what their needs are. You should be asking questions. A very common example I see a lot is you meet a person who is using a wheelchair and you immediately assume that they have no need for a two-story house. That's a faulty assumption. It's a presumption. What you didn't know and didn't ask was about their care provider who's going to live in the house with them but live upstairs. They want some separation because the care provider is not a family member. So they really do want two levels. That's just an example I just made up, but it happens. So we have to avoid making presumptions. The other thing that's important in your consultation is you want to show your professionalism and your value proposition, but not just describe it, but behave in a manner that exposes it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go along. So, get a little pause here, and I'm going to ask you guys, whoever's willing, what is your value proposition that you've got for your buyers right now? Is anyone willing to volunteer? What is the value proposition that you would say to a buyer now?
I can share.
Thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. As a Bay Area native, I offer a deep local market knowledge. I also have many, many years of design experience. So I have a different perspective, and I'm also proud to be a part of a team with over 42 years of experience in the Silicon Valley market.
I love it. That's really good. It's a great start. And I know that I've worked with you on your value proposition. I've worked with other people on theirs.
Mhm,
When you're thinking about it in a conversational way, you
mhm.
don't ever want your value proposition to sound like you're reading your resume.
Yeah.
You want it to sound, so my recommendation is that the question you should be answering is, here's how I help people. When someone says, what do you do for a living? I help people with X, right? Is a good way to go. I don't want you to, when you meet with folks, to say, I'm a new agent, God forbid, or I'm a realtor even. You want the fact that you're a realtor to come out of your dialogue about your value proposition. And you don't want to be, you want to make it very conversational. So, for example, what do you do for a living? Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. I love interior design. I love spaces and how to make them work for people. So I help people evaluate kitchens and bathrooms and living rooms and dining rooms to make sure that the space is going to work for them.
Makes sense.
And that what ends up happening is they say, so you're a realtor, right? And you could say, yeah, sure. I sell homes too as part of that process. But my goal really is to help people. Right? So I just made that up.
Yeah.
But every one of you, even if you are brand new and pre-licensee, every one of you has a value that you have from being a human and having lived, being an adult. You've lived things, you've experienced things. And so our goal is to uncover that value that you are going to bring that no one else but you can bring to an experience with a client and be able to communicate it in a way that earns their confidence. Let's keep going. Another thing I want you to think about are these questions regarding your professional standards. So even though you are part of a brokerage, you are also operating as an independent in the sense that you're paid as an independent contractor and you are an agent who is going to represent, your name is going to be on the buyer contract, your brokerage's name as well, but you're really the one driving the ship. So you need to have professional standards. You need to be thinking about these questions. What are your hours of availability? Are you going to take calls at 11 o'clock uh, at night? Are you going to take calls, go show property after dark? Are you going to set boundaries? What is the best way that people can reach you? What is going to be something, are you prepared to be reached in any way your buyers want? And if so, what are you going to do to make sure that you get those messages, whether they come in from voice, text, DMing, or emails? It is legal in California to represent two different buyers on the same property when you're writing offers. I strongly discourage it. If you do plan to do it, how are you going to manage that? If you're not going to do it, how are you going to communicate that? If you had your own listing, would you personally represent the buyer on your own listing? These are both dual agency scenarios. And if you were going to say you were going to represent the buyer on your listing, what would you say to the buyer and the seller to alleviate any concerns they might have about that conflict of interest that could come from these situations? What are you going to say to buyers who are not yet got their financing together, but want you to go show them a home? Will you do it? Will you show a home to a buyer who isn't pre-approved? Some agents do. What will you say to a buyer who doesn't want to sign an agreement with you, but still wants to go see a house? How will you manage that? You need to think about that. We're going to talk a little bit about that one in a minute. And then, what are you going to charge for commission? And how are you going to defend that commission? When you're working with buyers, there's whole classes we have about how do you manage the commission dialogue. Because you have our documents, all of our documents talk about commission and the fact that the buyer is being asked to make a commitment to pay and has to tell you about their financial incapacity if they can't pay you. And it raises another question. If you charge a commission and the buyer writes on the buyer and you do the buyer agency form and the buyer says, I can't afford to pay you, are you still going to show them? Are you still going to represent them if the seller won't pay the commission? Are the buyer prepared to walk away if they won't pay you and the seller won't pay you? You have to be able to think about how you're going to deal with those matters. Nobody, even most buyers do not expect you to work for free. But what if you encounter a situation where they tell you in their buyer agency that they can't afford to pay you because there's a space for that? And then you find you write an offer, you ask the seller to pay you, or they ask the seller to pay you, and the seller counters the offer and says, we'll accept the offer, but we are not going to pay for your agent. That's tricky. So you should think about it a little bit. Okay, I don't have all the answers today, and we could probably spend 20 minutes on each and every one of these, but I do want you to just have them in your head as things to think about. Your mentors can also support you in working through these dialogues. So, before you go on your buyer representation, before you go on meeting with a client, you should understand the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, the ZIP form. Before you meet with them, we're going to cover one aspect of it today, but you need to learn how to go through this. There is a class on the RPA class that is taught by our broker. That class covers this document as well. But you need to understand what you're having people sign. So that's one thing I'd like you to think about. There are 4 high-level elements of that contract that you need to talk about with your buyer. First of all, how you get paid. We just were talking about that because the contract explicitly says, here's how much I charge. And then there's a whole section on what happens if we ask the seller to pay me. Like, for example, let's suppose you ask for 3% and the seller only agrees to 2.5%. Your buyer needs to be told that they would be on the hook for the other 0.5%. I like to have that conversation before they sign this agreement, not when the counteroffer comes back later. What is the difference between exclusive and non-exclusive representation? We're going to go into that in a little bit. What is the scope? What do you do and not do? By the way, can anyone shout out something that we do not do as real estate agents in representing a buyer? Any guesses? We do not provide tax advice and we do not provide legal advice. That's beyond our scope. And you need to understand cancellation rights. Who can cancel the agency agreement and who and when? That's all covered in that document. So, apart from these standard things, you want to think about ways that you can differentiate yourself from other buyer agents they might be meeting. I want you guys to think about how you can go above and beyond. How can you be better than all the other agents or the typical agents, say? Because, there are a lot of agents who don't really know how to represent buyers very well. So this is a short sort of list of a few things you can do that will take you above the average. Finding properties that aren't online. If you are able to share with your client off-market properties, you are going to be doing better than the agents who just send them an MLS listings that are on the MLS. What kind of buyer guides and buyer information are you going to provide to them that they can use to learn how to buy a home? Are you going to use a pre-meeting buyer questionnaire? I do. Every time I meet someone and I'm going to have a meeting with them, before I meet with them, I send them a little Google form where they can fill out all the things that I would love to know before I meet with them. Are they renting? How much are they paying for rent? What is the size of the home they're in now? what is their timeline to buy? You know, there's a whole bunch of sort of standard questions. What are you looking for in a real estate agent? Stuff like that. Do you want to consider using a buyer loyalty agreement in addition to these legal forms to help cement your relationship? We're going to show you an example a little bit later. Are you going to offer any service guarantees or incentives? When I do represent buyers, I offer a what I call my Tuesday touch promise. And it's basically every Tuesday while we're under this contract together, I will reach out to you. Text, email, or voice, but I'm going to reach out to you. And whether you answer or not, I'm going to reach out to you every week, no matter where we're at during the period of time of our deal, while we're under this deal. And I say to them, if I don't, and this is a little certificate I give, if I don't reach out to you with a text, email, or voice, then I will give you, as a buyer, a $250 credit from me for your closing, towards your closing costs. And there's other kinds of service guarantees and incentives you can build in to your arrangement with your buyer. You also could have a menu of different service levels for different commission amounts. You know, here's what you get for 3.5% commission. Here's what you get for 3. Here's what you get for 2.5. Do note that most of our offices have a minimum buyer agency commission. We are not discount brokers. So your menu might be a little limited that way. If you want to have a buyer sign a deal with you for less than 2.5%, it must be approved by your broker. If you are in Oakland or Alameda or KW East Bay, Castro Valley, Alameda, Berkeley, if the broker is Eddie Moran, and Fremont also. If you're in Fremont, it's Eddie Moran. But in Palo Alto and San Francisco, it is Gene Gallagher. That's the person you need to go to if you want to go below the minimum brokerage fee for your office. What is the minimum brokerage fee for your office? It is in your onboarding paperwork with the brokerage. It's part of our policies and guidelines document. So you've had a great meeting. They want to hire you. There are 2 forms that we use. You must have them sign one of them. If a buyer says they don't want to sign this form before you show them a property, like I was talking about before, you can't show them any property. All you can say to them is, I'm sorry you don't want to sign this. Unfortunately, I'm legally bound to have a signature before I can show you a house. Please go to the open house, or please tell me what you need from me before you're willing to make the agreement with me. But you can't show a property without them. So what is the difference between each of these documents? The BRBC, we call it BRBC, or the Buyer Representation Agreement, is the one we want you to use as much as possible. It's a full service contract, and it is for no more than 3 months or 90 days. And the scope can be broad. It can be any property that you're licensed to sell them in California, or it can be homes in condominiums only in Oakland, right? Or even just one property address. So it's completely flexible. This document allows you to create exclusivity, which we're going to talk about in a minute. The PSRA, Property Showing and Representation Agreement, is a tool we use for one-time showings. They don't want to sign the full agreement. They don't want to go exclusive, but they want you to show them the house, and you want to show them the house. This contract has a 30-day maximum, and you must specify the properties on it up to, you can have many properties, but usually no more than 2 or 3. Can anyone think of an example when you might use the PSRA? No? So the PSRA is really useful at an open house. You're at an open house, you just met them, and they don't like the house that they're in, but you happen to know that there's a perfect house for them around the corner that you want to show them. So you say, hey, listen, after this open house is finished, let me meet you over there and I'll show you the property. I just need you to sign this agreement for this one showing because I can't show you a property without an agreement. In that case, the property showing and representation agreement is a good vehicle for that. You haven't had a chance to do a consultation, talk about your value proposition. You're just showing them a house.
Oh,
Yeah.
question. So,
Yeah.
it's only specifically for showings, nothing else.
For sure, private one-on-one showings, yes.
Got it.
This
Okay.
has nothing to do with the open house itself, right? So you would use the PSRA because they want to see one property or two properties, and they're not prepared to sign a full agreement with you yet.
Okay, got it.
It's only for 30 days. If you're going to write an offer, you'd want to transfer it to a full buyer representation agreement document. Note that in both these documents, the client makes a commitment to pay you if no one else does. And that then would transfer usually to a request from the seller in the offer. Okay. So said I was going to talk about exclusivity. So in the full buyer representation agreement, there are two sections that talk about exclusivity. The first section is on the first page near the top, where you specify type of representation. And if you want exclusive, you check this box. Okay. If you check this box, then your buyer must initial on page 5 at the top in section 15. So what does it mean to have an exclusive representation? Broker will devote time and resources to assist the buyer in finding and acquiring the property in expectation of being paid. Buyer shall not enter into another agreement in conflict with this agreement. So this means it's just you. Compensation. You get compensation, Mr. Buyer. You're going to pay the broker compensation if you acquire the property covered by the agreement during the representation period, with or without broker involvement, and even if another broker is also entitled to be paid for representing the buyer. So what this is basically saying is it doesn't really matter who finds the property. You're going to get paid. And there might be another broker involved. They may have been working with another agent under a different buyer representation agreement before they worked with you on that property. And maybe their offer wasn't accepted. Then they got that other broker arrangement ended. And now they've hired you and you're going to try again for the same property. That other broker may or may not be entitled to be paid, even though you're going to be getting paid under this agreement. Now, there's unilateral cancellation of as much as 30 days. Now, you can put another number of days on the contract than 30. You can say, you can cancel at will. I put in 1 day. You can cancel, just give me an email, and the next day the deal is done. You can do that, and either side can do it. Let's suppose you have a situation where you showed the buyer the property 3 times and you wrote the offer, it wasn't accepted. And your agreement is ending. You might want to specify before your agreement is over, send an email to the buyer saying, if you buy a property within 5 days of sorry, if you buy a property with another broker that I had been helping you with, or that I helped you write an offer on, then I get paid. It says here, within 5 days of the effective date of the cancellation, if the broker provides the buyer a list of properties for which there was broker involvement, maybe not even an offer, broker may still be entitled to compensation if buyer purchased one of the properties on the list. So what does this mean for you? If you have a buyer representation agreement expiring and you have reason to believe your client might write an offer on one of the properties you showed them with another agent after because it's not going to continue with you, make sure you give them this list. All right, so that's exclusive representation. Now, from my perspective, or from the brokerage perspective, we always want exclusive representation. We don't want your buyer to have you for one property and another agent for another property and another agent for a third property. It becomes a very inefficient and inflexible way for you to spend your time, right? If you don't have exclusivity, you might be wasting all this time searching for a property for them when they are under no commitment to hire you to have you buy that property with them. So we want the exclusivity. The other thing the exclusivity gives us is protection no matter who finds the property. They can't say to you, I don't want to pay your commission or because you didn't show me the property at first. This exclusivity overcomes that problem. Anyone have any questions about this before we go on?
No.
Okay, let's keep going. I had mentioned before that I had a tool for you for getting buyer commitment that is not really a legal agreement. So they have to sign the legal agreement, but you might want to use a loyalty pledge. So this is an example of a loyalty pledge that I have used many, many, many times. It simplifies the entire relationship down to communications. It doesn't talk about commission at all. The agent says they'll do good service. They will be a fiduciary. They'll be honest. They'll tell you everything going on in the deal. And if things aren't going, I will let you know and we will cancel the deal. And the buyer signs and says they're going to hire you exclusively and that they will tell you everything that's going on. And then they will give written notice if they don't want to work with you anymore. It really just simplifies the whole thing down. I find this really helpful when I'm doing a consultation. Sometimes people get kind of overwhelmed by the legal paperwork. So you can use a tool like this if you wanted to as part of your standard offering.
Is this in addition to the BRBC?
Yeah, you need the legal document to get paid. This document doesn't talk about getting paid.
Yeah, okay.
So you would use this as an add-on if you used it at all. Back in the day, before 2024 summer, before the summer of 2024, buyers agents could show property without an agreement. So back then, this was more important.
Got it.
I still use it though, because it gives me a chance to talk about fiduciary duty. It gives me a chance to set expectations. And I got to tell you guys, the bar is pretty low. Most agents don't have a discussion about what's on this page. So by merely presenting a page like this and having a conversation about it with your clients, you're already in the top 5% of buyer's agents.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you did you make this for yourself? Or is this available in the zip forms?
I made it for myself. So years ago, probably 15 years ago, an agent was using something like this.
Mhm.
And he said I could make my own version and do it myself.
Got
So
it. Okay.
no, it is not in zip forms. It is not on the library. It's not on the portal. If you want to make your own, shoot me an email and I will send you this so you can make your own. Now,
Perfect.
after this meeting, you can order a copy of this slide deck from my assistant. So then you'd get this slide and you'd have it in this format. But if you want a PDF of it, just email me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So all of this information leads to potential conversations. And so I wanted to share with you some conversation starters that you might want to use. The first one is, I'm not your typical buyer's agent, and here's why. And then you can go into some of the stuff we talked about here. Um, Many folks aren't aware of everything I do to help my clients. May I share my list? There are circulating on our agent portal and on YouTube and on online elsewhere, detailed lists of all the things that a buyer's agent does for their clients. And many, many, many buyers think all we do is turn the key and let them in the house. We help them write the offer, but they don't really know about how we help them understand the disclosures. They don't really understand how we make sure that their offer is going to be competitive. They don't really understand how we work with their lender, work with their insurance agent, work with inspectors, work with the agent on the other side to help get the deal done and to help get them the best rate. So best terms. So I like this one when there seems to be a question about value, right? Like we just talked a little bit before about value proposition. Sometimes it's that simple. It's that simple. It's that simple. Another dialogue starter I like to talk about is if you sign with me, you're going to be one of my VIP clients. So what does it mean? It's sort of like I treat clients differently than I treat leads. I treat leads differently than I treat contacts. So if you're a VIP client, you're going to have an elevated communication protocol with me where I'm going to pay you money if I don't reach out to you every week, like I shared with you before. Or I'm going to be searching for properties in a more aggressive way, including offline, off-market stuff. Exclusivity is my business practice. You can say that, and you can say it with confidence. You don't need to be ashamed about the fact that you work exclusively and you don't work in a non-exclusive way. And then you can say, you're going to be a VIP client. I'm going to be helping you with all these things. And I can't run a business where you're able to go write an offer with another agent if you find the house with them. So they say to you, I notice you're charging me 3%, but I thought the fee was 2.5%. And you could say, well, all fees are negotiable. I charge 3%, and here's why. And then you can get into your value proposition and any other reason why you feel that that's reasonable, and you can go from there. You can also share with them that they often don't even have to pay it. So I wanted to talk a little bit lastly about negotiations. Sometimes buyers will want to modify the contract and negotiate with you. And it isn't on here, but commission is one that comes up. So what I like to do is say, this is what I charge. And I usually get it from the seller in my experience. So let's leave it at the commission that I'm requesting. And if for some reason the seller isn't willing to pay me my commission, then we can talk about it further. Right. And this would be after I told them that they're on the hook for part of it if the seller doesn't agree in the contract to pay all of it. So, the first conversation, even before that, is, hey, I charge 3%, and here's why. And I just want to let you know that in most cases, we can get the seller to pay all of that. But if the seller did counter on commission, you would only be responsible for that portion that they're not willing to pay. So that might be maybe 0.5%. And then most often that's all it takes. And then the conversation goes elsewhere and they're fine with that. But if they're not fine with that, then you can talk to them about this idea of we can talk about it again if we get a counteroffer and revisit this. The other thing is you can get back to your value proposition. You can say something like, well, clearly I haven't really explained to you why why I'm worth the 3%. Here's why. And you could go over your value proposition more. But if you don't want to talk about commission, you can go sideways on them and do different negotiation tips like are specified here. I know you're a little concerned about making this commitment, Mr. Buyer. Instead of making it 90 days, let's just have it be for 1 month. It's easy to extend it. The reason I have it for 90 days is because if we get an offer accepted, it usually has an escrow period, and the escrow period might be 30 days, but there might be delays that make it even longer. So if we just have a short agreement, then you don't have to feel tied down, and we can extend it if we get into contract. Would that work for you? So that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can say is, Mr. Buyer, what if we limit our commitment to each other to homes in Oakland only or condominiums only? Now, I find that the second one is really useful when you're dealing with a person who's searching in another area also. I've had a situation where a buyer is thinking about either they're going to buy in Marin County or they're going to buy in Alameda County. They don't know which. They have an agent already in Alameda County, or they have the person they want to work with. They haven't signed anything yet. But they're nervous about signing with you because you don't know Marin County, for example. So you could say, no worries. Let's just sign this agreement for Alameda County only. You can even sign the agreement for specific properties, even though it's a full buyer service agreement hopefully with exclusivity, you can limit it to specific properties. I will limit it to specific properties if I'm representing, for example, a buyer who's buying their landlord's house. They came to me, Stephen, will you represent me? I'm buying my landlord's house. And I say, sure. And we sign an agreement where we just talk about that price, that property, because they're not moving. So there's specific circumstances where you might just have it for one property. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. And I'm also happy to talk more about any of the subjects here before we're done. We got about 15 minutes, so we got a lot of time. Does anyone have any specific questions?
I have questions.
Please.
So I've been holding open houses lately, and these potential clients, they seem very interested, asking all the questions, and they share the number and the contact information, and I respond within a day, and usually they respond, and then usually they don't. But I guess my question is, how do you keep the momentum going without losing contact with these potential clients?
So that's a great question. The the general feeling about pursuing leads is that you want to strike while the iron is hot. So you ideally want to get every lead, you want to get them to meet with you one-on-one so you can show your value proposition in there.
Mhm.
And when you meet with someone in person, it's more, and even on Zoom one-on-one, there's a level of commitment just to put aside the time to do that. So that's where we want to get to. So if you're at an open house and you have a really good lead and they're really keen and you've had a good conversation, you might
Mhm.
want to line up an appointment with them before they leave the open house.
Mhm.
Failing that, a protocol for follow-ups is warranted, and it's like any other kind of sales thing. You're going to follow up and follow up and follow up. Some agents will follow up just once and then give up. Some agents will follow up, 3 to 5 times over the next week and then
Mhm.
put the person and then not follow up anymore. If you have their contact information and you have their permission, you could follow up trying to reach them to schedule an appointment, but then after that, put them on an e-drip or on some sort of marketing campaign, and then follow up in a month.
Mhm.
The important thing is that not everyone that meets with you is going to want to hire you, right?
Yeah.
Or even meet with you one-on-one. but some will, and it's a numbers game. So just keep pushing to get the appointment in a non-threatening way. Let's go have a cup of coffee thing, and you will get your fair share of them. The problem that agents have is they don't ask. The person comes to the open house, they write down their name and number, they seem interested, and then they follow up once, and the person didn't answer the phone, and then they give up.
Yeah.
But yet that person may have gotten busy with something. The other thing, guys, is to avoid the tendency to think it's about you. Their lack of response to you after you had a good interaction with them is not about you. It's about where they're at in their life and in their purchase process cycle. And they may have reasons that have nothing to do with you about why they haven't followed up, and nothing to do with their desire to buy a home either.
Sure.
So that's my answer to that question. Did anyone have any questions about this presentation specifically?
No?
Okay.
All clear?
I have a question.
Oh.
Yes, please.
So for me, BRBC, like years back, it wasn't there. That's what you told us?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Yeah, BRBC, it wasn't there like few years back. It wasn't
Oh,
like
no, we've always had
mandatory.
it. What's changed is that the agreement is now required.
Required. Okay.
It's been around for years.
Mhm.
And I used them for years, long before the law changed, and now they're required.
Okay.
It
And
used to
then
be, that the seller and the seller's agent would decide how much they were going to pay the buyer's agent. And normally sellers would publish it on the MLS, and a buyer's agent could go look it up, and they'd know how much they're going to get paid, and the buyer would be outside of the process. They would just know that their agent's getting paid by the seller, and you might tell them, but they wouldn't be thinking they had any obligation. The way it works now is actually better,
yes.
because it's right up front that you're working for them for money, and hopefully they're going to get it paid by the seller, but sometimes not. And the thing to remember is that the seller is paying, the buyer is paying for it one way or the other. Even if the seller says they're paying the agent, it's coming out of the seller's proceeds, so the price they accept is factored it in already.
Yeah.
So, whether it's would it be the case maybe that if they weren't paying the buyer's agent, they would charge more money for the house,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
less money? They would charge less money.
Mhm.
They would charge less money for the house. So 3% or 2.5% less. And then the buyer would pay for it out of pocket. But for the buyer, it's the same money. The key is making sure your buyer understands that you're working for money, you don't work for free, and that if they can't afford to pay you, and the seller won't pay you or won't pay you all of it, they are going to be responsible to pay you the balance. And they have to be okay with that. If they're not, then there's an issue of value proposition. It hasn't been clearly established. They don't feel you're worth the money you're asking from them. And that's a dialogue that you should overcome 9.5 times out of 10. Now, you're always going to have people who think we're not, you aren't worth it. And no matter what you tell them, they're still going to feel you're not worth it. You don't want to work with those people.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want to work with someone who doesn't value the work you're doing. It's just going to be a nightmare. And they're not going to be happy clients that'll be referable later on. They'll just be upset later on. So keep that in mind as well.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, then. Thank you guys for taking the time out to be in the class today. And I hope you guys have a great